When you think about the history of Civilization, the video game series, there is one constant. Although things have changed dramatically since the original game released 25 years ago, one thing has remained the same. One person has always been there. I am of course talking about the man with his name on the box, Mr. Sid Meier, the original designer of Civilization, and the one person to talk to about the history of this incredible strategy series. And he joined me in a Skype call this week to do just that, starting with his role on that first game all those years ago. Enjoy.
When I finished Civ 1, I was pretty much exhausted and ready to do something different. And that's actually been the case with a lot of the Civ designers. You'll see like a new person come along and kind of take the reins and add their energy and their new ideas to it. So one of the things that's kind of unique about the Civ series is how, I basically designed Civ 1, and then Brian Reynolds came, added his ideas to Civ 2, and then Jeff Briggs and Soren, and every time there's been kind of a new design team to take the core of the game, but add some great new ideas to it. I think that's really what's made it, given its longevity, is that every new Civ has had some really interesting new features to it, and that has kind of kept the community interested and kept the gameplay fresh and new. So we've found, almost by accident, a way to kind of keep it alive. And the other thing I think we didn't do was kind of overly, a Civ every year would have been a little bit too much.
Sure.
But by pacing it out and making sure we had gotten all the feedback from the community and new ideas that we had time to test out and experiment with. Also, looking at the new technology, multiplayer. The original Civ was on floppy disks, and then we had CD-ROMs, and now we have digital distribution. So, kind of being able to fold a lot of that new technology into Civ also, I think, kept it fresh and new each time there was a new game.
Absolutely. With the first Civ game, am I right in thinking that you were not only the programmer but also the artist and the musician for Civilization?
I did a lot of that. The original Civ supported 4-color CGA graphics and 16-color and EGA, and then the wonderful 256-color VGA. So some of the very simple graphics I did because there was only very limited things we could do. I also designed the font for that. But some of the bigger pieces, the city screen and the characters, were done by artists. And actually, Jeff Briggs wrote the title music, which actually was kind of the first time we had a almost orchestral piece of music in one of our games. So I did a lot of stuff, but I had a lot of help as well.
Oh, well, I didn't know that. So how big was the team back then? I'm right in thinking it was like less than 10 people.
It was by the end it might have gotten up to 10 people, but for a long time it was just Bruce Shelley and myself working on the prototype and the gameplay, and I would just give him a disc every day or two, and he would play it and kind of give me some feedback, and that probably went on for 6 to 9 months before we got a couple of artists and some more technology in there. But yeah, it was a very small team, certainly compared to today when we have a lot more people working on it.
Absolutely. And how long was development on Civilization from start to finish? Can you remember?
It probably took about a year overall. We actually started working on it in more of a SimCity mode, where you would kind of zone districts, and it was not a turn-based game initially. It was more of a real-time thing like SimCity, but we worked on it for a couple of months, put it aside actually, and did covert action, and then came back to it with this new idea of turn-based. Let's try turn-based. And that proved to be kind of the key to really making it all come together. And from then on, we probably spent another 9 or 10 months to make it. But I'd say about a year overall was the development time.
By today's standards, that is just crazy. Like 10 people and a year to create one of the most defining video games in strategy.
We didn't know. We didn't know that we were doing the impossible, so we just went ahead and did it. So certainly looking back, things have changed a lot. But we had, working with Bruce was really rewarding. He had a lot of great ideas, and it just kind of came together. And of course, the the expectations in terms of cutscenes and orchestral scores and things like that was a little bit less in those days. So we were able to kind of get it all done in a year or so.
You didn't need to get like Sean Bean to narrate anything for you that time around.
No, I don't think we could even do voice in those days. I don't know.
And do you know how big the team is today, just to compare that to? Or
I would say it grows from the beginning to the end, but I'd say by the end we had probably 60 or so people working on it, maybe more. So, and if you include QA, that's another probably 30 or 40 people at the very end. So yeah, it's a different world today.
Sure, absolutely. And as you mentioned before, I think one of the really interesting things about the Civilization series is that there's been a different lead designer each time around, bringing something new to the series. At what point did you realize that's something you wanted for Civilization? Was it once you finished the first one you realized you'd sort of done your Civ game or your take on that?
Yeah, I think once I finished Civ 1, that was everything I could imagine putting into a Civ game. And then it turned out that this community developed, but people were playing it and really getting into it, coming up with new ideas, suggestions. And Brian was working at Microprose at the time, and he had done Colonization, which was kind of a twist on the Civ idea. And he had a bunch of new ideas for Civilization, and I said, go for it. I think that'd be great. What happened was people understood the game. I think it had a kind of a clarity to it that you could understand the rules, you could understand the mechanics, but the way they interacted with each other was very interesting and created a different game every time. And so people felt they got it and they wanted to add, this new feature. Brian specifically wanted to do modding, which was a new thing at the time, but really added a whole new dimension to Civilization. And he wanted to do it in a window with this brand new Windows software that was coming out. And so there were just some new things that he could add to it that were really valuable. That was something he had a passion for. So it made sense for him to take that and run with it. And then that continued with each iteration, with multiplayer, with the going to 3D. Whoa, 3D. So each time there was, a designer kind of with some new ideas. We've talked about this kind of 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 rule, where there's like 1/3 of the game. The new game is still got that core mechanic. 1/3 are maybe brand new ideas that we haven't tried before, and then 1/3 is like refining some things that could have been improved a little bit from the last game, and that's kind of kept the continuity going, but also added the freshness to the game.
Well, what's the process of finding a new lead designer for Civilization? Is it quite a natural thing? It sounded like with Brian it definitely was, as he was already there, and you'd been talking about it, you'd worked on Colonization, but how has that process sort of changed over the years?
So the people that tend to come to Microprose or Firaxis are already interested in this type of game and probably have played Civ and come with a bunch of ideas. So it's not like we need to search for a designer. We probably have 2 or 3 people here already that would be interested in doing that. So it's kind of talking to them about their ideas and figuring out what's the best way to proceed.
When you look at those lead designers that you've had over the years, is there a trait that...
You were asking, I think, what traits we were looking for in a designer for a new Civ game. I think there's one would certainly be an enthusiasm for the game and some experience with it. A lot of times a designer will maybe make an expansion or something for a previous Civ and kind of prove that they have that capability of design. And then we're also looking for what are the new ideas that they have a passion for, because new ideas are going to have to be explored. Something may work, something may not work. They're going to have to be willing to kind of really work on this new feature, whether it's hexes in Civ or 1 unit per tile, or the kind of new ideas that have come along in Civ are going to need to be tested out, and you're going to be willing to have to kind of say, well, it didn't work quite the way I thought it would, but here's a way that I can make it work, or you kind of have that willingness to kind of get down in the trenches and really explore and experiment and iterate on the new ideas. But I think what we've seen is especially giving designers a chance to do an expansion or work with a previous designer. There's just ways to kind of ease into it that kind of reduce our risk a little bit.
Sure, don't just drop them completely in the deep end,
right.
I guess. The rule of thirds that you talked about earlier, could you talk me through some examples of how that's been used? it doesn't necessarily matter with which Civ game, but I'd like to hear if you could split one of the games into those 3/3.
Sure. I think that the third that we keep are things like turn-based. This idea of starting small and growing kind of with the player's design, giving the player lots of options in terms of things they can do, but revealing them gradually over time so they're not overwhelmed at the beginning. The idea of random map, the map is different each time. The historical connections, those are all very core to Civ, and I think are things that give it its grounding, give it its gameplay. And the way combat is handled is probably in that second third, something that we know is going to be there, but it can change a bit. Whether it's how the odds are calculated, whether there's one unit per tile or multiple units per tile or stacks of doom, or Civ 1 had zones of control and other weird things that we got rid of, but combat remained kind of part of the game, but it evolved and it changed, more than some of those core ideas. And then the last third, the new third, were systems like religion, for example, the espionage, things that were not in the original Civ or in the second Civ. Modding is another example. So introducing some multiplayer. There's kind of some brand new ideas that have come along over time that represented that brand new feature that you hadn't seen before. So I think those are a couple of examples of the different thirds of the design process.
Who came up with the rule? Is it sort of, and when did that happen?
we didn't come up with the rule first and then do it. It was more like we had done 2 or 3 Civs, and we looked back and said, well, this is really what we did, and I think it worked out pretty well. I think we always intuitively knew, we could go so far, but not too much further in terms of changing things. So we kind of knew that we'd have to think about that, but it was only kind of in looking back that we said, well, this is really how we've done things. It seemed to work out pretty well. So, let's make a rule out of it.
Absolutely.
Let's pretend we know what we're doing.
We had this all along, right, guys?
Right. It's all scientific. We just press a button and a new Civ pops out.
One of the interesting things that I've heard you say before is that along this idea of introducing new features to Civilization, because the game is so big and ambitious, you have to be careful that you don't overload the player. And in fact, sometimes when you add something, that means you have to take something out as a result. Is that something that you still find?
Yes, I think that's kind of another one of our rules, that for every new system we put in, we need to kind of scale back on something else, because it would be very easy with a topic as huge as Civilization to overwhelm the player with all sorts of things to think about. And the core of the gameplay is really the player understanding what's happening and kind of projecting into the future what they want to do next, what might happen next. To be able to do that, the player has to not be thinking about trying to figure out what's happening now, but understand what's happening now and be able to project their strategy into the future. Okay, I know where I'm now. That means I'm probably in a good position to do this. I better watch out about that. And if the player can be thinking in the future, that's always the kind of gameplay that we're looking for. That's the one more turn, because the player's always kind of anticipating the next cool thing that they're going to accomplish or do. So in order for that to be realistic, the game has to kind of not max out the complexity, but be something that the player can kind of absorb and comprehend. So that's kind of our other rules. When we add a new system, we're going to maybe scale back on something else or take out a different system so that we kind of keep the same level of complexity from Civ to Civ.
Absolutely. Do you have any good examples of a case in which you've had to do that?
I think that the religion system, for example, has kind of gotten more and less important over time. The way combat is handled. I think that we get a lot of feedback from our players on kind of what they like and they don't like, and we can kind of roll that into our new design process. But I think I don't have any great examples of that, but it's kind of something that we keep in mind as we go forward. I think we found one of the things about Civ 6 is we now have this combined units concept, which is kind of a hybrid of the 1 unit per turn and the stacks of doom. So it's finding a good complexity level that lets the player think and strategize, but is not too complicated.
Absolutely. With that in mind, is there anything that you've wanted to add to Civilization? As you said, it's quite an all-encompassing term. You can pretty much do anything. But has there been any features or ideas that you've wanted to bring into Civilization that just would make it too complex?
There's always a question of where to start and where to end, and we've debated what about starting in the Stone Age, with dinosaurs and evolving from that point, or what about taking it into the future and maybe going into space? And I think we look at those things and trade off the kind of complexity that it would add to the game versus the value, and we always kind of come back to the idea that this is really the most interesting part of history and civilization, and provides the player the most interesting decisions and the most kind of satisfying things to do. So certainly where to end has always been a challenge. Is always, once you get this one more turn rolling, no more turns is a hard thing to rationalize. So it's those kind of things that we think about, but we've never really decided that yes, we need to take Civ and continue it into the future or go back in time. But you never know. We may figure out how to do that, and it's one of the things I think we do tend to think about as we look at the Civ design.
You'll have to wait for the next plucky lead developer to come in and say, "We're going into the future." That's the new.
I've got it figured out. Yes, I can see it. I can see it now.
Could you talk me through your role at Firaxis at the moment? I know you spend a lot of your time working on prototypes still. Is that right?
That's right. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Do you still get involved with the kind of core development process of the Civilization games? Like, what is your involvement with that?
I play the game. If I'm around, if anybody wants to talk about an idea or whatever, but I'm happy to kind of turn it over to the design team. It's got to be somebody's vision. It's my stuff. My original ideas are still in there, but the design team kind of takes and adds their thing to it. So I'm on a day-to-day. I'm not involved. I'm around and kind of aware of how things are going. But yeah, I have some other fun things to work on. So
sure.
It's wonderful.
It seems like some designers would struggle to kind of pass on their child to someone else to nurture. Like, was that a difficult decision to make, or did it just feel right? I guess
it felt right to me. I think I was very satisfied with the way Civ 1 came together and the game that we made there. Certainly looking back, there's some things we'd do differently, but I was pretty happy with that. So I felt I could I could be satisfied. I didn't need to do more on that, and especially with Brian and other designers, really doing a great job with their iterations. I have no concerns about letting it go out into the world and really grow and evolve the way that it has.
But the game and the series is so linked to you personally. Is it? I guess it just must be interesting to see it develop in different directions as different designers come in.
I think. There are a few things, occasionally that it's like, well, let's not quite do that because that's not Civ. I think that I do occasionally, have that idea that we got to keep it. It's got to be. One of the things that Brian and I talked about back when he was working is kind of taking the battles and putting them onto a separate map and fighting them out in kind of in a mini game mode. And we looked at that, and it really added to the complexity without much value. So, I represent kind of the historical knowledge of Civ of things we've tried and didn't work out. So I can kind of perhaps provide a little of that perspective as we look at a new game. But it's it's an honor to be associated with that game. I think it's outgrown me. It's outgrown any one person. It's become this community. It's become this body of knowledge. This these experiences. We had our Firaxicon event a number of months back, and I guess a year ago, and I ran into parents and children that were both, the parent had kind of introduced their son or daughter to Civ, and now I'm seeing this kind of multi-generational play of Civ, and just to be a part of that was very rewarding, satisfying. So it's much bigger than me at this point, but I'm proud to have been there at the beginning, and if that's my legacy, I'm perfectly happy with that.
Absolutely. I think you've done all right. In your mind, what defines a Civilization game then? Is it, because obviously it changes each time. You mentioned that original third that you need to keep. Is there anything that jumps out to you as like this, when this is the description of what a Civilization game is?
I think it's I'd like it to be a game where you at the end of a game you look back to your starting point, and you feel that there's an incredible distance between where you started and where you ended up, that you've gone on this really interesting journey. And that to me is the feel of Civilization, is that, wow, I started with that one little city and all this stuff happened, and it's unique to me. This story will never be told again, and I want to go back and do another one and see what the next story is. So that sense of having gone through an epic, adventure is what we're trying to create with the Civ experience. And everything else is a mechanic and a feature and an asset and things like that. But we want you to kind of leave the real world and live in our world for a while and feel that you've had this epic adventure while you're there.
And do you ever think that you guys will be done with Civilization, or does this formula just work forever? Like, as long as you find the right person to come in with those fresh ideas, because obviously you didn't originally anticipate 25 years,
right? So we don't know what we're talking about. So I don't know. I mean, we certainly appreciate the opportunity we've had to do this, and hope it continues. It's really the community that supported us, and their enthusiasm, their support, their ideas. We don't see a reason why we can't go into the future, but we're not taking that for granted. I think each Civ has to kind of prove itself, and has to bring something new, and has to introduce be something that our fans want to play, but perhaps also introduce itself to some new players. So we're working to make that happen, but there's no guarantees.
And do you see that when you look back at the kind of the catalogue of Civilization games? Do you see like a distinct flavour to each one? Has it worked so far?
I think so. I think they've there's been a good balance between new features and the kind of core gameplay. There's been a support for the community. I think that not every feature is loved by everybody, but they're done in a way that people can have a discussion about it, and can understand the pros and cons and the reasons behind it. And I think part of what gives us longevity is that there are things to talk about. There are interesting things to discuss and consider, and play again and try a different strategy that somebody else has talked about. So that richness, I think, has kept it alive, and I think we'll continue to keep it going.
And there we are. That was a genuine pleasure to be a part of, and I hope you liked it as much as I did. Sid Meier, he's got just a tremendous lack of ego about the fact that he created Civilization. Yes, if you enjoyed that video, we have done some other things with Civ 6, including an interview with the lead designer of that game, Ed Beach, or a playthrough of the first few turns back at a preview event a little while ago. So take a look at those if you like, and yeah, what a lovely man.